Hi, good afternoon. It's great to be back, and I'm sure you're enjoying as much as I have enjoyed all these discussions and panels on the architecture of baseball and biographies, and Jeff Dyer's amazing, what I would call a bibliography posing as a speech. But all I've been hearing when I go through the lobby there is, where are the sports poems? I mean, there seems to be a hunger, a deep itching hunger. So I've found some sports poems. I don't think it seems like an oxymoron, sports poem, like Office Party. And another one I like is Family Fun. But I think it's only because it's a fairly recent genre. I mean, after the Greeks, who rewarded athletes and poets with laurels for their triumphs, and laurels really comes from the pursuit of Daphne by Apollo in Greek mythology. And having not caught her, he turned her into a tree. Thank you very much, Apollo. And it was a laurel tree, and that's where the laurel comes from. But poets usually turn to other subjects after that, nature, for example. And so really not until the 20th century do you find poets who are generally not good at sports writing about athletes who are genuinely not good at writing poems, with a few examples like Muhammad Ali. Although someone published a book called Holy Cow, which is a collection of the unintentional poetry of Phil Rizzuto, actually taken from online. And I think Yogi Berra is also another unintentional poet of a darker sort, a kind of poetry of the absurd. There was an interview with Yogi, and at the end of the interview, the interviewer said, now we're going to play a little game that Yogi's agreed to do. I'm just going to throw out a name of a baseball player, and Yogi's just going to respond off the top of his head. Okay, Yogi, ready to play? Yogi says, fine. And the guy says, okay, Mickey Mantle. Yogi says, what about him? So I'm not going to strain making likenesses between poetry and sports, except to say that the sonnet forms roughly the same rectangle as the tennis court and the baseball court as well. Poems do take place within boundary lines, but there are more differences, I think, and one of the key differences between poetry and sports it has to do with time. The main subject of poetry, Western poetry, is human mortality, and that is to say, death. As I say, if you major in poetry or major in literature, you're majoring in death, basically. Death gets us up in the morning and out over to the window. And so in that sense, time is this unstoppable force, whereas in many sports, you have timeouts, but you can basically be called on delay of game. Also in sports, the rewards are clear and immediate, except maybe when it's 0-0, or in a sport that in which ties don't have to be unresolved. Whatever recognition poets receive comes much after the fact of writing. As someone said, there are reasons you don't see high fives in the library. And in poetry, you're also playing against invisible opponents, i.e. every other poet trying to jockey you out of position. I haven't really written any sports poems myself. I have an approximate one that I'm going to read later. And I haven't, in selecting these poems, I haven't followed George Plimpton's small ball theory. I'm surprised no one's mentioned that. Plimpton theorized that the smaller the ball, the better the writing about the sport. So that tennis and golf were his examples over football and basketball, where the ball is just too big. But that always seemed to be a rather elitist position, because tennis and golf were, until fairly recently, known as country club sports. But I think one of the closest thing you can say to tie poetry and sports together is that they both involve play, language play in the case of poets. So I'll start with two poems in which play, rhyming play, is at work. And this poem is called Wilt Chamberlain, and people had mentioned in previous discussions about poets or other athletes getting to the point of retiring and becoming making endorsements or becoming a kind of commodity. And so this is a poem called Wilt Chamberlain by R.R. Knudsen. Wilt was built so he could give a tilt over the rim hardly higher than him. Does Wilty feel guilty he's not that trim in girth and limb as when he was slim? Old age is grim. Now, much like Joe DiMaggio, Wilty is seen on the TV screen with an easy laugh, folding in half. He's doing a plug for the Volkswagen Bug to prove it's wide enough, tall, and more so for Wilt's famous torso to fit inside. This is a poem by Mae Swenson called it's called An Analysis of Baseball. So she gets the basics, very basic ingredients of baseball, and then plays with that. Analysis of baseball. It's about the ball, the bat, and the mitt. Ball hits bat, or it hits mitt. Bat doesn't hit ball. Bat meets it. Ball bounces off bat, flies air, or thuds ground, dud, or it fits mitt. But bat waits for ball to mate. Ball hates to take bat's bait. Ball flirts. Bat's late. Doesn't keep the date. Ball goes in, thwack to mitt, and goes out, thwack back to mitt. Ball fits mitt, but not all the time. Sometimes ball gets hit, pow, when bat meets it and sails to a place where mitt has to quit in disgrace. That's about the bases loaded, about 40,000 fans exploded. It's about the ball, the bat, the mitt, the bases and the fans. It's done on a diamond and for fun. It's about home and it's about run. Mae Swenson, very good. And there are two lovely sports poems in your directory there, in the catalog. And one is by Kevin Young, one of our poets here. Great poem about Hank Aaron. And the other is a poem by Robert Francis, and it's called The Pitcher. And I won't read it because it's in your book. But I'll read another poem by Robert Francis called, a word very basic to lots of sports, it's called catch. And it shows an analogy between poetry and tossing a ball back and forth, in that the poet throws and the reader catches. Catch. Oh, and I think Jeff Dyer was talking about the unphotographability of a catch. Unphotographable, like My Funny Valentine. So, catch. Two boys, uncoached, are tossing a poem together. Overhand, underhand, backhand, sleight of hand, every hand. Teasing with attitudes, latitudes, interludes, altitudes. High, make him fly off the ground for it. Low, make him stoop, make him scoop it up, make him as almost as possible miss it. Fast, let him sting from it, now fool him slowly. Everything tricky, risky, nonchalant, anything under the sun to outwit the prosy. Over the tree and the long sweet cadence down, over his head, make him scramble to pick up the meaning. And now like a posy, a pretty one plump in his hands. So, thank you. And just as you really usually don't see two boys just throwing a ball directly back and forth, just like in poetry, we tend to say a number of things at the same time. This poem by Alicia Ostriker goes back to the kind of pre-sport childhood sense of, as she calls it in her title, speed and strength. It's also a poem about flirtation at the age of 10. His speed and strength, so the narrator is female. His speed and strength, which is the strength of 10 years, races me home from the pool. First I am ahead, Nike on my bicycle, no hands, and the Times crossword tucked in my rack. Then he is ahead, the Green Hornet, buzzing up Witherspoon, flashing around the corner to Nassau Street. At noon sharp, he demonstrated his neat 1.5 flips off the board. Oh, brave. Did you see me, he wanted to know. And I, doing my backstroke laps, was Juno, Oceanus. Then, for a while, I watched some black and white boys wrestling and joking, teammates, wet, plums and peaches touching each other as if it is not necessary to make hate, as if Whitman was right and there is no death. A big wind at our backs. It is lovely. The maple boughs ride up and down like ships. Do you mind if I take off, he says. I'll catch you later. See you, I shout and wave as he peels away, pedaling hard, rocket and pilot. May Swenson thanks you, or Alicia Ostriker does. When poets approach, if you throw the element of time into sports and poetry, many of these sports poems, and I've been gathering quite a few of them. Well, many of them are not very good. That's why I wanted to be thanked for my labors, because for every one poem you're going to read, I read about 20 poems about sports that you're not going to hear. But many of the poems are about getting older and using the diminishing athletic abilities to measure time. It seems that by the time you've learned how to write poems that are good, you're too old to play sports. So you write about old men playing sports. Now here is I know the median age in this room pretty much. Here's a 29-year-old worried about losing his abilities. And it's by David Hilton, and it's called I Try to Turn in My Jock. Going up for the jump shot, giving the kid the head fakes and all, till he's jocked right out of the door of the gym, and I'm free at the top with the ball and my touch, lofting the arc off my fingertips. I feel my left calf turn to stone, and my ankle wrap inward to form, when I land, a neat right angle with my leg, and I'm on the floor, a pile of sweat and sick muscles, saying, Hilton, you're 29, getting fat, can't drive to your right anymore. You can think of better things to do on Saturday afternoons than be a chump for a bunch of sophomore third stringers, join the Y, steam and martinis and muscle toned. But shit, the shot goes in. Nice surprise there, and this is another kind of aging basketball player poem called The Jump Shooter by Dennis Trudell. And one thing you get in basketball are called pickup games, where you just kind of pick up the ball and start playing with the guy. Guys just throw a game together very quickly. And here's a guy who's taking a walk and runs into an accidental basketball court accidentally. The jump shooter. The way the ball hung there against the blue or purple one night last week across town at a playground where I had gone to spare my wife from the mood I'd swallowed, and saw in the dusk a stranger shooting baskets, a few years older, maybe 35, and overweight a little, beer belly. Saw him shooting there and joined him, didn't ask or anything, simply went over, picked off a rebound, and hooked it back up. While he smiled, I nodded, and for 10 minutes or so, we took turns taking shots, and the thing is, neither of us said a word, and this fellow who's too heavy now and slow to play for any team still had the old touch, seldom ever missed, kept moving further out, and finally his T-shirt, a gray and fuzzy blur. I stood under the rim, could almost hear the high school cheer begin and fill a gym while wooden bleachers rocked. He made 3 in a row from 20 feet, moved back 2 steps, faked out a pitch of darkness, arched another one, and the way the ball hung there against the blue and purple, then suddenly filled the net, made me wave goodbye, breathe deeply, and begin to whistle as I walked back home. And here's another. This is a poem called Couplet, and it's under the title. It says, Old Timers' Day, Fenway Park, May 1st, 1982. It's a poem by Donald Hall, who's written quite a few poems about baseball. Old Timers' Day. And he mentions a moment in the Odyssey when Odysseus goes into the underworld, and among other people, including his mother, he sees Achilles, who is diminished. Achilles basically says to him, we go to the underworld, you learn things. And basically, Achilles says, it's not very good being dead. He says, it's better to be a farmhand alive than be king of the exhausted dead. Anyway, Old Timers' Day, and the poem is called Couplet. When the tall, puffy figure wearing number 9 starts late for the fly ball, laboring forward like a lame truck horse startled by a garter snake, this old fellow whose body we remember as sleek and nervous as a filly's and barely catches it in his glove's tip, we rise and applaud, weeping. On a green field, we observe the ruin of even the bravest body, as Odysseus wept to glimpse among the shades the shadow of Achilles. And this is a poem with a lovely title. And this is sort of, baseball is, or a ball is a kind of accidental, or the whole sport is accidental to this poem. And the poem is, The Man Into Whose Yard You Should Not Hit Your Ball. And it continues into the poem. The man into whose yard you should not hit your ball each day mowed his lawn, his dry quarter acre, the machine slicing a wisp from each blade's tip. Dust storms rose around the roar, 6 p.m. every day, spring, summer, fall. If he could mow the snow, he would. On one side, his neighbors, the cows, turned their backs to him and did what they do to the grass. Where he worked, I don't know, but it set his jaw too tight. His wife, a cipher, shoebox tissue, shattered apron. As if into her head he drove a wedge of shale. Years later, his daughter goes to jail. Mow his lawn, gently down a decade's summers. On his other side lived me and mine across a narrow pasture, often fallow, a field of fly balls, the best part of childhood and baseball. But no one could cross his line. And if it did, as one did in 1956 and another in 1958, the ball came back as coleslaw. His lawnmower ate it up, happy to cut something, no matter what the manual said about foreign objects, stones, or sticks. Strange things happen when poets write about sports, in that poems like to get off the subject and on to something else. And here's a poem by Lewis Jenkins called Football. I take the snap from the center, fake to the right, fade back. I've got protection. I've got a receiver open downfield. What the hell is this? This isn't a football, it's a shoe. A man's brown leather Oxford, a cousin to the football maybe, the same skin, but not the same, a thing made for the earth, not for the air. I realize that this world where anything is possible, and I understand also that one often has to make do with what one has. I've eaten pancakes, for instance, that with clear corn syrup on them because there was no maple syrup and they weren't very good. Well, anyway, this is different. My man downfield is waving his arms. One has certain responsibilities. One has to make choices. This isn't right, and I'm not going to throw it. I like that one. Glad you like that one. And I said earlier, I think that someone said poets are people who find it impossible to say one thing at a time. And this is a poem called How to Sacrifice by Mick Cotrain. How to Sacrifice, and that is, of course, in baseball, how to bunt. How to sacrifice. Pivot in the box, square up, surrender to the pitcher. Slide your top hand up the barrel, don't squeeze, keep your hands soft, bend your knees. You need to keep your balance, let the ball come to you, be patient, don't stab at it, point your bat, absorb the shock, and hope the ball stays fair. Afterwards, expect no high fives, no headlines, no contract extension. No one bunts himself onto an all-star team. You do it because the runner on first, he needs to come home. He's your teammate, he's your brother, he's your son, and you're the guy who still knows how to lay one down. Now suddenly I have an abundance of sports poems. A number of these poems have to do with not being at the stadium, but listening to baseball, particularly baseball, on the radio or watching a game on television, such as the way poets and many other people live. And this is a poem by Gail Mazur, and it's a very interesting poem. It's called Listening to Baseball in the Car. Well, I'll forgive her being a Red Sox fan, and it's about the Red Sox, and it's about, there you are, this one there. Listening to baseball in the car. This morning I argued with a friend about angels. I didn't believe in his belief in them. I can't believe they're not a metaphor. Our argument, affectionate, lacking in animus, went nowhere. We promised to talk again soon. Now, when I'm driving away from Boston and the Red Sox are losing, I hear the announcer say, "No angels in the sky today." Baseball ease for a cloudless afternoon. No shadows to help the man who waits in the outfield staring into an August sun. Although I know the announcer is not a rabbi or a sage, no, he's sort of a sage, disconsolate philosopher of batting slumps and injuries, still I scan the pale blue sky through my polarized windshield, fervently hopeful for my fading team, and I feel something like a little foolish, prayerful throbbing in my throat, and remember being told years ago that men are only a little lower than the angels. Floating ahead of me at the Vermont border, I see a few wispy horsemane clouds, which I quietly pray will drift down to Fenway Park, where a demonic opponent has just slammed another Red Sox pitch, and the center fielder, call him Jim, runs back, back, looking heavenward, and is shielded and does not lose the white ball in his glove. I love her. This is a lovely description, I think, of being a fan, that prayerful throbbing in my throat, rooting for your team. So that's Gail Mazur. Now this is, we really have drifted away from the sport in this poem. This is by Nancy Boutillier. It's called What a Cat Contemplates when presenting, What a Cat Contemplates while pretending to clean herself. So many books about what animals are thinking about. So attentive to her paws, she seems, leaning over, licking tirelessly, but thinking not about what dirt has climbed under her claws. No, the cat sees herself sternly stepping up to the plate, spitting in her paw palms, and gripping the bat just so. With a look of feline indifference, she tends to one final itch before staring down the pitcher in the last instant before delivery. When she rubs her wet cat wrist behind her furry ear, you'd think she had a spot of mud there or a flea, but really the cat is signaling the runner at first to stretch that lead a little farther down the baseline. By the time she is perched on her hind legs, lapping at the fur of her underside, the cat is sliding safely into home. Most of these are written by men. There was a nice poem I came across. It was a little longer. It was called Casey's Daughter at the Bat, which is nice. And this is a poem by Ada Limon, a wonderful poet, about horse racing, and it's called How to Triumph Like a Girl. I like the lady horses best, how they make it look all so easy, like running 40 miles an hour is as fun as taking a nap or grass. I like that lady horse swagger after winning. Ears up, girls, ears up. But mainly, let's be honest, I like that they're ladies, as if this big, dangerous animal is also part of me, that somewhere inside the delicate skin of my body, there pumps an 8-pound female horse heart, giant with power, heavy with blood. Don't you want to believe it? Don't you want to lift my shirt and see the huge beating genius machine that thinks, no, it knows it's going to come in first? Yeah. I think I have just a little more time. And hitting golf balls off the bluff, I'll skip that one. Well, the only sports poem, the only poem I've written that could come close to a sports poem, I'll read, and it's called Night Golf, and it's about using golf as a way to fall asleep. And when a player they talk about a player being in the zone, and I think Jeff was talking about the visual clarity that comes with that, and a kind of silence in a way, but also a slang term for when you're talking about someone who's in the zone. You say that he's unconscious, man. Guy's unconscious. Well, I actually was unconscious when this describes me in an unconscious state, or seeking on my way to unconsciousness. Night golf. I remember the night I discovered, lying in bed in the dark, that playing a few imagined holes of golf was a more effective way to drift off than counting 1,000 leaping sheep, and that the local links was a greener path to sleep than a cloudy pasture with its easy fence. How restful to stroll the shadowy fairways, to skirt the moon-blanched bunkers and hear the night owl in the woods. Who cared about the score with the club swung with a club swung with ease as I glided from shot to shot over the mown and rolling ground, alone and drowsy with my weightless bag. 18 small cups punched into the bristling grass, 18 flags limp on their sticks in the silent, windless dark. But in the bedroom with its luminous clock and propped open window, I got only as far as the seventh hole before I slipped easily away. The difficult seventh, the tester they called it, where, just as on the earlier holes, I tapped in dreamingly for birdie. Thank you. Okay, I've got just a little more time, and I'm going to read one other poem. Let's see here. Here's a poem called 9 Triads, and it's sort of by Lillian Morrison. It's kind of taking a certain aspect of sport in general, and then showing how in 3 particular sports it manifests itself. So there's the first line, then the 3 examples, and that forms the stanza. 9 Triads. 3 grand arcs, the lift of the pole vaulter over the bar, the golf ball's flight to the green, the home run into the bleachers. 3 pleasurable curves, the ice skater's figure 8, the long cast of the fisherman, the arched back of the gymnast. 3 swishes that lift the heart, the basketball spin through the net, the skier's swoop down the snow-packed hill, the diver's entry into the water. 3 swift arrivals to admire, the completed pass, the arrow into the bullseye, the sprinter at the tape. 3 shots requiring skill, the slap shot, the shot put, the putt out. 3 carriers of suspense, the place kick for a field goal, the rim shot, 3 balls and 2 strikes. 3 vital sounds, the hunter's horn, the starter's gun, the bell for the end of the round. 3 excellent wishes, to move the body with grace, to fly without a machine, to outrun time. Thank you.